Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind. Is the president aware of Judge Kavanaugh's position when it comes to investigating the executive, investigating the president? Is he aware of Judge Kavanaugh's writings from 2009 when Judge Kavanaugh said the indictment and trial of the sitting president would cripple the federal government, rendering it unable to function with credibility in either the international or domestic arenas? Is President Trump aware of that?
So the president and the White House are aware of all of Judge Kavanaugh's public record. But what we are focused on is that if you look at his opinions, you look at his writings, there are some that would emphasize greater power for the executive, some that would limit the power of the executive, some that would put a ruling on one or another side of a specific issue. But the constant strain through all of the rulings, through all the opinions, through all the writings is an individual who interprets the law and the Constitution as it was written.
Does the president agree with the 2009 writing?
I haven't asked the president about that writing, but I will say that overall he finds Judge Kavanaugh, through his many opinions, through his many writings, through his decade plus of service now in the D.C. Court of Appeals, to be an individual of the highest caliber, an individual who is more than fit to serve on the Supreme Court.
All right, so here's the question that he's being, this is the document that he's being asked about. Kavanaugh wrote an article calling for Congress to exempt a sitting president from criminal prosecution and investigation, including from questioning by criminal prosecutors, defense counsel, in a criminal setting and in a civil setting. Now, remember that I just told you that he was part of the Starr prosecution. He was Kenneth Starr's right-hand guy. So he didn't have this problem with, subpoenaing a president to testify in a civil matter, the Paula Jones matter. He didn't have a problem subpoenaing a president to testify before a grand jury, okay? He didn't have a problem then. All of a sudden, he becomes Bush's advisor, doubly his advisor, and he writes and during the Obama administration, he writes this law review article saying, the president really should be immune from questioning in a criminal matter. The president really should be immune from, indictment. The president really should be immune from being called to question in a civil matter. Because, I had time to think about it. And what I did with Ken Starr, while it was fun and dirty and filthy, that shouldn't apply any longer to other presidents. It was a one-time fun thing I did. That's what I'm saying. This man, where he stands depends on where he's sitting. This man is such a swamp creature. He is he was born in Washington, D.C. He went to Georgetown Prep in Washington, D.C. He went to Yale. He went to Yale again for law school. Then he goes, works for the Justice Department. Then his whole life, his entire life has been serving Republican presidents, telling them anything he wants to hear, telling them anything that they want to hear, and finding a way in the law to make it so. He's a dangerous little mild-mannered, he's one of those, he's got that dull, useless look, right? He's one of those scary dudes. So basically what we're going to have here is an obstruction of justice. Here's what he wrote. I'm going to read it because if I don't know that you ever will. And it's in the homework today at randyrhodes.com. But it's frightening. Okay, this is what, Now remember, he was Ken Starr's henchman. Okay, I should show you the questions that he wrote for Ken Starr to ask. I'll read them for you after because this is more important. But the questions he wrote to ask are so vile. Did you? I'll just tell you. Did you ejaculate in Monica Lewinsky's mouth twice? Did you ejaculate in a trash basket while Monica Lewinsky was, I mean, okay. This is what he says. This is his writing, not mine. First, my chief takeaway, this is about providing sitting presidents with a temporary deferral of civil suits and of criminal prosecutions and investigations. This is why Donald Trump likes him, okay? This is everything, because Donald Trump has picked a 53-year-old man to sit on the Supreme Court for the whole entire, it'll be way into the middle of this century that this man will sit on the court, serving Republican ideologue presidents for that long, changing the way everybody lives by giving a president the most awesome powers that you could possibly imagine, and finding ways to convince people that he's actually a strict constitutionalist, construction, whatever you want to call them. He isn't, okay? First, my chief takeaway from working in the White House for 5.5 years, and particularly from my nearly 3 years of work as staff secretary when I was fortunate to travel the country and the world with President Bush. That's W. Now, remember, W thought he could spy on you without warrants, surveillance. Remember? And they went to battle against James Comey. Just remember, okay? Is that the job of president is far more difficult than any other civilian position in government. It frankly makes being a member of Congress or the judiciary look rather easy by comparison. The decisions the president must make are hard and often life or death. The pressure is relentless. The problems arise from all directions. The criticism is unremitting and personal. And at the end of the day, only one person is responsible. There are not 8 other colleagues as there are on the Supreme Court, or 99 other colleagues as there are in the Senate, or 434 other colleagues as there are in the House. There is no review panel for presidential decisions. Really? Congress isn't a check on the president? Okay, if you say so. See, there is no review panel for presidential decisions and few opportunities for do-overs. The president alone makes the most important decisions. It is true that presidents carve out occasional free time to exercise or read or attend social events. But don't be fooled. The job and the pressure never stop. We exalt and revere the presidency in this country. Yet even so, I think we grossly underestimate how difficult the job is. At the end of the Clinton presidency, John Harris wrote an excellent book about President Clinton entitled The Survivor. I've come to think that the book's title is an accurate description for all presidents in the modern era. Having seen firsthand how complex and difficult that job is, I believe it is vital that the president be able to focus on his never-ending tasks with as few distractions as possible. The country wants the president to be, quote, one of us who bears the same responsibilities of citizenship that all share. But I believe that the president should be excused from some of the burdens of ordinary citizenship while serving in office. This man is about to tell you that the president is above the law. Trust me. This is not something I necessarily thought in the 80s or the 90s. Like Americans at that time, I believe that the president should be required to shoulder the same obligations that we all carry. But in retrospect, that seems a mistake. Looking back to the late 90s, for example, the nation certainly would have been better off if President Clinton could have focused on Osama bin Laden without being distracted by the Paula Jones sexual harassment case and its criminal investigation offshoots. You were the number 2 in those investigations. Oh, okay. To be sure, one can correctly say that President Clinton brought that ordeal on himself, by his answers during the deposition in the Jones case, if nothing else. And my point here is not to say that the relevant actors, the Supreme Court in Jones, Judge Susan Weber Wright, and independent counsel Ken Starr did anything other than their proper duty under the law as it then existed. But the law as it existed was itself the problem, particularly the extent to which it allowed civil suits against presidents to proceed while the president is in office. That is still the law, just so you know. With that in mind, it would be appropriate for Congress to enact a statute providing that any personal civil suits against presidents, like certain members of the military, be deferred while the president is in office. The result the Supreme Court reached in Clinton v. Jones, that presidents are not constitutionally entitled to deferral of civil suits, may well have been entirely correct, but that is beyond the scope of this inquiry. Now, I want you to remember these words. That is beyond the scope of this inquiry. Or we don't deal with that here. Or we're not going to comment on that now. This is a tool. This is a technique that this man, Kavanaugh, uses in almost all his writings. Okay, I don't think that Donald Trump ever sat down and read any of his writings except for this one, and only a portion of this one, and only that portion of this one. However, in reading his dissents about pre-existing conditions, about contraception in Obamacare, religious freedom, dissents where he does not agree with the majority or the mainstream thinking on any, he finds a way to twist himself into a pretzel where he says, but we're not really dealing with this issue here, but let me just say that if I were the one in charge, I would do it the other way. I would give the president a deferral from civil suits. I would give the president a deferral from crimes and criminal investigations, having to answer questions in criminal. That's a technique, a tool, a device that he uses in everything, so that he can avoid questioning for his Supreme Court nomination, which he surely knew was in the cards for him from the time he was 38 years old. This man knew. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, this is kind of conspiratorial, I will say, but Skull and Bones, anybody? Yale Law School, Yale undergrad, anybody? Because John Kerry was a Skull and Bones guy, and W was a Skull and Bones guy, and W's dad was a Skull and Bones guy. This guy is a Yale guy, both undergrad. I mean, really? He just kind of always knew. Anyway. Then he quotes the court in Jones, where they say in Jones that the president must answer to civil suits. The president is not above the law, either in damages claims, in civil, or if he violated criminal law, as in Whitewater, okay, which was a nothing burger. But he said, but the court in Jones stated that Congress is free to provide a temporary deferral of civil suits while the president is in office. Again, this is something he does all the time. He provides a roadmap for the court or for the Congress to create a law, especially to fit a Republican president who finds himself in the same pickle that President Clinton found himself in. Change the law. Congress may be wise to do so, as it is done for certain members of the military. He restates that. Deferral would allow the president to focus on the vital duties he was elected to perform. Congress should consider doing the same, moreover, with respect to criminal investigations and criminal prosecutions of the president. In particular, Congress might consider a law exempting a president while in office from criminal prosecution and investigation. Meaning, if this man is seated on the Supreme Court and Mueller is still doing an investigation into criminal wrongdoing by this president having to do with traitor, being a traitor to this nation, taking foreign money and using foreign help in order to spread propaganda, suppress voting, all that. If it comes to light that the president is a traitor, this man is saying, hey, don't worry about it. We'll find 5-4 that you're too busy to be prosecuted for criminal activity, that you are indeed above the law because you're the president. This is his writing. Criminal investigations targeted at or revolving around a president are inevitably politicized by both their supporters and critics. As I have written, well, too bad. It's, there's politics in politics. Too bad. Oh. He wrote, as I have written before, quote, no attorney general or special counsel will have the necessary credibility to avoid the inevitable charges that he is politically motivated, whether in favor of the president or against him, depending on the individual leading the investigation and its results. Yes, because Ken Starr was politically motivated to take a land deal and explore a consensual affair that the president had with a young girl. And you wrote lewd questions to ask the president in order to have the president impeached and removed. Ken Starr was a politically motivated pick. He was a politically motivated person. The entire Whitewater land deal was a nothing burger, and yet he ended up investigating sex in a civil suit brought by Paula Jones, who was completely and totally used by the Republican Party. Okay, then he says the indictment and trial of a sitting president would cripple the federal government, rendering it unable to function with credibility in either the international or domestic arenas. No, that's why we have secession. That's why we have the order of succession. That's why we have rules that if a president becomes incapacitated or unable to fulfill his duties, the vice president becomes the president. And if the vice president can't do it because he's also implicated, then you get the Speaker of the House over there. Okay, I mean, this man just makes crap up. Then he writes, such an outcome would ill serve the public interest, especially in times of financial or national security crisis. Even the lesser burdens of a criminal investigation, including preparing for questioning by criminal investigators, are time-consuming and distracting. Oh, too bad. Like civil suits, criminal investigations take the president's focus away from his or her responsibilities to the people. And a president who is concerned about an ongoing criminal investigation is almost inevitably going to do a worse job as president. Oh, tell it to Richard Nixon. One might raise at least two important critiques of these ideas. And this is enough. See, he's going to do it again. The first critique, right, is that no one is above the law in our system of government. I strongly agree with that principle, but it is not ultimately a persuasive criticism of these suggestions. The point is not to put the president above the law or to eliminate checks on the president, but simply to defer litigation and investigations until the president is out of office. That's all he deals with. That's it. That's his entire statement on the president is not above the law. Well, the point is not to put him above the law, although we are going to put him above the law while he's president. So you could have a murdering president. You could have a president that literally kills his own people. You could have a president that suspends elections. You could have a president that enables, right, that you enable to do whatever he wants to do and not face any criminal prosecution or any checks on his power. But he doesn't deal with that here. He just says, the point is not to put the president above the law or to eliminate checks on the president, but to simply defer litigation and investigations until he's out of office. And that's it. That's his only comment. Then he deals with a second possibility. The second concern is that a country needs a check against a bad behaving or law-breaking president, but the Constitution already provides that check. If the president does something dastardly, the impeachment process is available. Not a single prosecutor, judge, or jury should be able to accomplish what the Constitution assigns to Congress. Moreover, an impeached and removed president is still subject to criminal prosecution afterwards. In short, the Constitution establishes a clear mechanism to deter executive malfeasance. We should not burden a sitting president with civil suits, criminal investigations, or criminal prosecutions. The president's job is difficult enough as it is. And the country loses when the president's focus is distracted by the burdens of civil litigation or criminal investigations and possible prosecution. That's it. End of his little treaty here, his treatise on how the president is not above the law because but what if you have the Enabling Act, right? And the president of the United States or the chancellor of Germany is able to have his cheering majority ignore the president's wrongdoing, just like we have now. Ignore the president's law breaking. Ignore the president's racism. Ignore the president's outrageous behavior. Ignore that the president is being sued by 21 women. You know what I mean? What if, all of a sudden Congress just became a cheering section for the president and impeachment wasn't a possibility? Are you saying that the American people, when it is proven to a grand jury that the president is indictable, that he has committed criminal offenses, that a grand jury finds indictable, the president should get a pass because Congress is his handmaiden and you now are going to be the Supreme Court. You're going to be his handmaiden there too. And you're going to say, it doesn't matter what Mueller finds. In fact, Mueller does not have the right to even investigate people around the president. That's what he wrote there. That investigations even around the president are too distracting. This is a very dangerous man. This is a man who finds ways to argue whatever is convenient at the moment. He found ways to argue that Clinton should be...
For Android and iOS, visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
Senator, do you believe that President Trump selected Judge Kavanaugh because of Judge Kavanaugh's views on presidential power and his position in that law review paper where he said that presidents should not be subject to prosecution while in office?
I certainly believe he was the judge probably of the 25. They all would repeal Roe. They all would repeal ACA. But on this issue, the Mueller issue, which came up after the vetting by these two groups, he's probably the most extreme. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was very important to Donald Trump, knowing Donald Trump, and I have no proof. Do you think he didn't inquire about this either directly or indirectly, knowing Donald Trump? What do you think?
No, this is obviously an inside game, and this is a game that was played by Justice Kennedy. This is a technique that Justice Kennedy uses also, where he says, well, gerrymandering, we're not, even though the Constitution, one man, one vote, right? And the gerrymandering dilutes one man, one vote. And that is easy. That's an easy call. And almost every Supreme Court has said one man, one vote is the law of the land. And that, right? But Kennedy said, nah, we're not going to deal with this here. It could go back to the states. Because now they're all about states' rights with voting. But in 2000, they were not about Florida's right to select the manner in which we chose our electors, right? So these are shapeshifters. These are people who, where they stand depends on where they sit. And the answer to that is always, if you stand for nothing, you will fall for anything. And that is who Kavanaugh is. He is a man who has embedded himself like a termite, like a cockroach inside the Washington swamp, inside the elite. I promise you, well, I can't promise you, but I suspect he's been, a Skull and Bones member for years and years, and that this group of, this small group of Yale the small group of Yale attendees form this secret bond. It's like the Masons or, just a secret society, and they plot and plan about how and when and where they can undo the democratic principles of the United States in favor of the corporate elite, the moneyed elite, the wealthy elite, because they have so much disdain for the people, the little people. You know, they just have disdain. They don't think we're capable of self-governing. They know best. They know better. They know what women should be doing. They know what gays should be doing. They know what, the president should be doing. They know when a war is a good war. They know when a war is a bad war. And they will find a way. They will find a way. This is like unfreaking believable. This is sick. It's so sick and it's so obvious what's going on here.
Look, I sure wouldn't take a bet on Leonard Leo's handpicked list to keep Roe, for sure. And the other one is the Heritage Foundation. They have dedicated their existence to repealing ACA, pulling the government out of health care. The president promised that in his campaign as well. So these are two issues broadly popular with the American people: women's reproductive rights, keeping health care, particularly pre-existing conditions. I will oppose this nominee with everything I've got. And I'd make one other point, particularly for you guys, which is this. You are worried about President Trump's overreach. So am I. This nominee has stood more, certainly before he became a judge, for presidential overreach. He has said the president shouldn't be investigated. He's gone so far as to say a president, if he declares a law unconstitutional, doesn't have to obey it. How is he going to react if Mueller needs a subpoena, if Mueller needs some other action? So for all these reasons, this man should not be on the bench. And I believe if we can prove these 2 points to the American people, that he will repeal Roe and women's reproductive freedom, that he will repeal ACA and the right to pre-existing conditions, or the right to protect pre-existing conditions, that we will get a majority in the Senate to vote against him. I know it's an uphill fight, but they said we couldn't do it with health care, and we did.
Seriously, dude, I'm telling you, this man did say, and this is where the Enabling Act really, really hit me. Reading through these 33 pages in the Minnesota Law Review that Kavanaugh wrote in 2009, this is not old thought. This is current thought. This is what he believes right now. That if, and this is what he wrote, that if a president finds a law unconstitutional, the president is not required to follow it. Let me say that again. If the president finds a law unconstitutional, he doesn't have an obligation to follow it. That's what the Enabling Act said. It told Adolf that if his Reichstag, his Congress, didn't, think that he had the right to do something because it violated the German Constitution, he didn't have an obligation to follow it. And of course, we all know that Adolf did not follow the German Constitution. He did what he wanted to do. That is shockingly sick. That has nothing to do with upholding the Constitution. That is exactly saying if you want to ignore it, you can. You can ignore the freaking Constitution. I'm telling you right now, you owe it to yourself, no matter what. Like I said, the right-wing, religious groups, they're anti this guy as much as I am. Because they know he's unreliable, and they want someone that's going to definitely rule against privacy rights, rule against, gay marriage. This is what, they want. And they don't know if they could trust him because this guy is a shapeshifter. This guy is look, let me put it this way. You're used to the idea that lawyers can argue both sides of a case, right? Anybody that's ever gone to law school knows that you're supposed to be able to argue both sides of a case, because in a trial court, your audience is the jury, and in some cases, a judge. And so you want to, they say when the law's not on your side, argue the facts. When the facts aren't on your side, argue the law. And when both are not on your side, pound your fist on the table, right? So that's what lawyers are trained to do, because their audience is a jury or a judge. But this is a different occupation, Supreme Court Justice. The only audience is the Constitution of the United States. And when you have a guy who can argue both sides of the Constitution, meaning he thinks there are two sides to the Constitution and there aren't, and that is why most Supreme Court justices, even when they're appointed by a Ronald Reagan, like a Justice Souter, even like, Judge Roberts, who was appointed by W, found that the ACA was constitutional after all. See, that's why they find for democratic, principles, and I say that small d, more often than they find for conservative principles, because the Constitution itself is a democratic document. It's a progressive document. It says in order to create a more perfect union, meaning it was always forward-looking. It always assumed. That's why in the Constitution, there's a prescription for how to amend the Constitution. That's why in the Constitution, there's redress of grievances. Okay? Because they understood that it needed to be more perfect than it was when they adopted it, and we still had slaves as, human beings as chattel. Chattel freaking slavery, and they understood they couldn't fix it then, or they thought they couldn't. And so they left it for future generations. The Constitution is a living, breathing document. It is a progressive document. It is a democratic document. It was meant to expand and grow as we, as a country, expand and grow. These people on the right, they think that the Constitution is a conservative document, and the proof is in the pudding. Once people are on the Supreme Court, even Anthony Kennedy, they will say things that they can't, they can't change. They'll say things like, we're not going to deal with this here. We don't take this up now. We're not commenting on that here. This is for another day, right? And kick it someplace else. Kick the can down the road. This guy will not do that. This guy is giving the 5-4 majority the rationale, the roadmap to say the Constitution is not a living, breathing document. The Constitution can be bent, it could be twisted, it could be shaped to serve this guy, but not that guy. We can do this for Trump right now and get the Mueller investigation shut down. And then later, if we have a Democratic president, we can, reverse ourselves and we can investigate the hell out of him. And we can indict him and we could do, subpoenas or whatever. I'll find a way. That's sick. That's sick. And that's why this guy has to be defeated. And the way to defeat him is really pretty simple. Can it happen? Yes. Will it happen? I don't know. But every single Democrat, everyone, Heidi Heitkamp included, Donnelly in Indiana included, Senator Dean Heller in Arizona, okay, Republican included. You got, if you could keep the Democratic minority together, and they could speak in one voice that this man is not trustworthy, he doesn't have reverence for the Constitution or the written words of it, that he has been on both sides of every case, which might be fine for a lawyer, but is not the occupation of a Supreme Court justice, that he is inconsistent, that he finds against Democratic presidents' investigations, and that he finds that an investigation into a Republican president is repugnant and a distraction. If you could hold all the Democrats together on that principle, and you could convince a Dean Heller or a Susan Collins or a Lisa Murkowski to vote no, then this fails. And it will fail spectacularly, and it will fail right before the election. This man cannot go forward. I'm so sorry. Go back to coaching your kids, because you're very lucky. You're very lucky that in this particular instance, you have your children with you. The idea that a president who is separating children from their families at this exact moment in time, missing a court deadline to reunify the under fives with their parents today, and that Kavanaugh supposedly loves children so much that he would accept a nomination from a man like that, tells you everything you need to know about his careerist mentality over principle. Because if anybody had any principles at this point in time, and they were being asked to be a judge by Donald Trump, and they had children, they would say no. And they would make it a big damn deal. Rick in Los Angeles.
Hey, Randy.
Hi.
Yeah, this guy is like, I mean, he's like the creature from the Black Frickin' Lagoon. You know?
He's his own ecosystem, man. This guy, you stand next to him, you'll get mosquito bites.
Exactly. I mean, he has nothing on the cave there in Thailand, 2.5 miles down where all those boys were rescued. But,
I'm telling you, he shoved himself so far up Trump's ass, I really thought we were going to need Navy SEALs.
Yeah, no kidding. And, I mean, this is like deja vu all over again. Like about, 12, 13 years ago, the Bush administration's mantra during, I think, the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Alito and then first Roberts, then Alito, was, all about the unitary executive. That basically the executive can do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah.
He can
torture. He can black site.
them.
He can disappear people. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if he doesn't like the way a law is written, he can just do signing statements.
Oh,
change
right.
The law,
And Kavanaugh talks about signing statements in this, lovely little piece here.
Oh, does he? I'll have to read it. I haven't had a chance.
Oh, you have to. I'm so sorry, everybody, but these are 33 pages, and you know what? They're only half pages because when you write like this, half the page is what you're writing, and then below are all these footnotes. So
yeah, that's easy.
It's really only 15 pages of reading.
Yeah, and just for the non-lawyers in the audience, Randy, the key is to first read the text of the article and skip the footnotes the first time around, and then once you've read the text, go back and just scan the footnotes and see which ones seem to be apt, let's say.
Yep. Yep.
That's how it's done, to get through the stuff. But, this guy is a real, this guy is a real piece of work. Clearly, Deadbeat Donnie selected him because he wants him to help shut down the Mueller investigation.
I'm telling you, the backroom boys, the shadowy guys, we used to call it the smoke-filled back rooms, they only gave Donald Trump these 33 pages. That's all they gave him. And he said, ooh, look at this. This guy doesn't think that the president or anybody around the president should be questioned in even criminal situations. So he said, that's my guy. And the backroom boys wanted this guy.
Yeah.
They wanted this guy because this guy protects Republicans at all costs and investigates the crap out of Democrats and changes the rules for Democrats, when they're president, as in countenances just about anything, including torture, including, no stem cell research because, the babies, right? I mean, he'll do anything he needs to. Right, the snowflakes. Snowflake babies, right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, these guys who selected this nominee, they're clearly the barons in the balcony and the Donald Henley song working it,
Yeah.
And they basically are hoping that, by feeding the Trumpanzees or the maggots, whatever you want to call them, all this intellectual horse crap, that they're going to placate them,
I know.
That's the whole idea.
I know.
So,
listen.
Anyway, great show, Randy.
Thank you, honey. Honest to God, man, this cannot happen. It just can't. This is exactly the kind of swamp thing that you don't want sitting on the Supreme Court. Okay, we all know Alito and Roberts were corporate maven. They would always rule for the corporation over the worker, over the little people. And look what's happened to our right to organize, et cetera, et cetera. And look what's happened to our pay and wages. This is worse. Go to RandyRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.